Obafemi Awolowo, the Western Region Crisis, Independence and the Birth of a Vision. In 1960, Nigeria stepped into independence with a fragile but powerful sense of hope. Across the Western region, that hope was guided by one of the most disciplined political minds of the era, Obafemi Awolowo. From the bustling streets of Ibadan to the quiet towns scattered across the region, people spoke of change not as a dream, but as something already taking shape. Awolowo's leadership was defined by structure and foresight. His policies prioritized education, healthcare, and economic growth. Schools began to appear in places that had never seen formal learning. Roads connected communities that had long been isolated. For many families, the future finally seemed within reach. But beneath the visible progress, political tension quietly grew. Within the action group, differences in ideology began to surface. Some leaders wanted to maintain strict principles, while others sought flexible alliances to strengthen power. Awolowo focused on long-term stability, others focused on immediate control. The foundation of progress was strong, but it was no longer united. The rise of internal opposition. As the early years of independence unfolded, cracks within the action group became impossible to ignore. At the center of the growing conflict stood Samuel Ladoke Akintola, a once trusted ally of Awolowo who now represented a different political direction. Akintola believed governance required flexibility. He supported cooperation with the federal government, even if it meant compromising certain party principles. Awolowo, however, remained firm in his ideological stance, convinced that discipline and consistency were necessary for lasting progress. What began as a disagreement soon became a rivalry. Party meetings grew tense. Conversations turned into confrontations. Supporters divided into factions, each convinced they were defending the true future of the Western region. The unity that once defined the party slowly dissolved under pressure. The conflict reached its peak in 1962 during a chaotic parliamentary session. Voices clashed, order broke down, and governance itself seemed to collapse in real time. The federal government intervened, declaring a state of emergency. The Western region had entered a new phase 1, defined not by unity, but by open division, emergency rule, and a shift in power. The declaration of emergency rule marked a turning point. What was intended to restore order instead exposed the depth of political instability in the Western region. Leadership structures were dismantled and rebuilt under federal control, shifting the balance of power dramatically. Awolowo was no longer in command of the region he had helped transform. His influence remained strong among supporters, but his authority had been reduced. Meanwhile, Akintola regained political footing with federal backing, reinforcing the divide between opposing factions. The streets reflected this uncertainty. Conversations in markets and homes were filled with concern. People questioned not just leadership, but the future of governance itself. Trust began to fade, replaced by suspicion and unease. Awolowo, now focused on national politics, continued to challenge what he saw as injustice. But the environment had changed. Power was no longer determined solely by vision, it was now shaped by control and alignment at the highest levels. The Western region stood at a crossroads, and the choices made in this moment would define everything that followed. Arrest and the weight of accusation. Tension reached a critical point when accusations against Awolowo began to circulate widely. Allegations of conspiracy and subversion spread quickly, fueling an already unstable political environment. What had been a struggle for leadership was now turning into a legal and national crisis. Then came the moment that shocked the nation. Awolowo was arrested. The news moved swiftly through the Western region, carried by radio broadcasts and word of mouth. For many, it was a moment of disbelief. A leader who had once symbolized progress now stood accused of crimes against the state. Supporters saw it as political suppression. Opponents viewed it as accountability. But regardless of perspective, the impact was undeniable. Awolowo's trial became a focal point of national attention. Inside the courtroom, he remained calm and composed, showing little outward reaction. Outside, however, the region continued to fracture. Political trust weakened further. Institutions struggled to maintain credibility. The sense of unity that once defined the Western region had all but disappeared. And as the trial continued, the region edged closer to a breaking point. Elections and the eruption of violence. By 1965, The Western region had become a landscape of tension and uncertainty. The upcoming elections were seen as an opportunity to restore order and legitimacy. Instead, they triggered one of the most volatile periods in the region's history. Almost immediately, allegations of electoral fraud emerged. Results were disputed before they were even finalized. Public trust collapsed, and frustration quickly turned into anger. The streets erupted. Protests spread across major cities, particularly in Ibadan. Demonstrations escalated into violence. Buildings were attacked, and communities became divided along political lines. The unrest grew so intense that it overwhelmed law enforcement efforts. The region entered a period marked by chaos and instability. Governance struggled to function under the weight of constant disruption. What had once been a political disagreement had now evolved into widespread social conflict. From prison, Awolowo received fragments of news about the situation. Though removed from direct involvement, he understood the significance of what was happening. The system he helped build was no longer holding, and the consequences were becoming impossible to control. Collapse of order and rising uncertainty. As the violence continued, the Western region moved closer to complete breakdown. Political authority weakened further, and the ability of civilian leadership to maintain order diminished rapidly. Daily life became unpredictable, shaped by fear and instability. Communities that once functioned peacefully were now divided. Trust between citizens eroded as political loyalties influenced relationships. The sense of shared purpose that had defined the early years of independence was gone. At the national level, concern grew. The crisis in the Western region was no longer isolated. It threatened the stability of the entire country. The federal government struggled to respond effectively, caught between maintaining control and managing escalating tensions. Behind the scenes, another force observed the situation carefully: the military. Quiet, disciplined, and increasingly aware of the weaknesses in civilian governance, military leaders began to consider their role in the unfolding crisis. They watched as political institutions faltered and public confidence declined. The question was no longer whether change would come. It was how and who would bring it. The verdict and the end of the First Republic. The conclusion of Awolowo's trial marked a decisive moment in Nigeria's political history. In a tense courtroom surrounded by uncertainty and expectation, Obafemi Awolowo received the final judgment. He was found guilty. The sentence symbolized more than a legal outcome. It represented the closing of a chapter defined by vision, ambition, and internal conflict. For his supporters, it was a profound loss. For his opponents, it was a political turning point. But outside the courtroom, the situation remained unstable. The Western region continued to struggle with the aftermath of violence and division. Governance had not recovered, and public trust remained fragile. Then, in January 1966, the balance shifted completely. The military intervened. A coup brought an end to Nigeria's First Republic, reshaping the nation's political structure overnight. The crisis in the Western region had played a significant role in creating the conditions for that moment. What began as a conflict within a political party had evolved into a national transformation, and in its wake, Nigeria entered a new and uncertain era. If you enjoyed the story of Obafemi Awolowo, the Western region crisis, like this video and subscribe for more African legends and forgotten histories. Share this story and tell us in the comments which African legend we should tell next.